Hello and welcome to the Saskatchewan Real Estate Podcast. I'm your host, Ron Caroni, and this week, if you're looking for more information on where and how to invest in Saskatchewan investment properties, you better check this episode out. We're sitting down with CEO of the Saskatchewan Landlords Association, Cameron Choquette, and we talk all things real estate investing in Saskatchewan. Hope you enjoy.
This is the Saskatchewan Real Estate Podcast, the show that highlights Saskatchewan real estate. Looking to buy your first house, your next investment property? Subscribe to never miss an episode. Here's your host, Ron Caroni.
Welcome back to the Saskatchewan Real Estate Podcast. I'm your host, Ron Caroni, and joined today by CEO of the Saskatchewan Landlord Association, Cameron Choquette. Cameron, thanks so much for having us on today.
Yeah, good morning. Thanks for letting me join you.
Yeah, not at all, Cameron. And we're really looking forward to chatting about all things renters, landlords in Saskatchewan. And we'll start it off with, I'll give you a softball, Cameron. Is Saskatchewan a good place to buy rental properties?
Absolutely. With about 11 to 14,000 immigrants coming into Saskatchewan every year, that's just one measure that we look at to determine if there is adequate rental demand in our province and if that would facilitate low vacancy and of course increase the margin, the cash on cash return for rental property investors. There's also a number of factors on why it is a good place. Besides the dreadfully cold weather that we've experiencing, we have
Brutal.
A number of educational institutions in the province that increase student demand for rental properties. We have relatively low and affordable property taxes, depending on who you ask and which municipality you're in. And we also have relatively friendly municipal bylaws on zoning restrictions that allow for legal basement suites. So overall, absolutely, Saskatchewan's a great place to own rental property. It's affordable, it's easy to manage, and there continues to be strong demand for rental properties across the province.
You kind of touched on it a little bit there, Cameron, but other than the cold weather, are there things that make Saskatchewan a hard place to have a rental property? Are there any factors that go into that?
Well, if you're investing in the Humboldts or Yorktons of the world, but you may not live in those communities, the geographic spread between where you might live and where you might own rental properties is certainly a factor for some of our members who maybe live in Saskatoon and invest in smaller urban centers or in rural Saskatchewan. When a tenant phones that they need a furnace filter changed, and you need to drive 180 kilometers to change it, for example. So that geography can play as one of the detracting factors. But if you live where you're investing, it's certainly, you can eliminate that problem. Like I said, the cold weather, winter months are hard to manage rental properties between freezing pipes and furnaces or carbon monoxide issues. But those are the same issues that regular homeowners face. But it's incumbent upon a landlord to really take those challenges head on. We do have, somewhat average rental increase provisions in Saskatchewan. So there are other provinces in the country that allow for more frequent rental increases. But in Saskatchewan, it varies from 6 months to a year's notice, depending on the type of a lease. And when the market is shifting and costs are increasing on a monthly basis, it can be harder to maximize the return on investment when you can only raise rent on the renewal of a lease or every 6 months or a year. So those are maybe a couple factors that take away from the rental market in Saskatchewan. But overall, I'd say the good outweighs the bad right now.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's an important factor when you're considering something, investing in a smaller community in Saskatchewan, is you might not have access to the property managers that you would in a Saskatoon or Regina, where you might have to find someone very locally that they're not maybe part of a company, but you have to find them to manage the property for you if you don't want to have to drive that 180 kilometers.
It's a great point, Ron. The availability of professional property managers in Saskatchewan really decreases when you leave the major centers in the province. We see a large concentration by nature of the number of rental units available to manage in Saskatoon, Regina, and Prince Albert. But certified property managers through the Real Estate Commission are few and far between across the rest of the province. And if you aren't willing to drive those miles to your rental property, adequate property management is really an integral part of the real estate industry for rentals in Saskatchewan. And that's part of the reason why our association exists, to make sure that people are equipped, if they can't access a property manager, to manage it themselves.
Fantastic. Cameron, shifting gears a little bit, what are some of the challenges that landlords face during the pandemic?
Well, early on in the pandemic, there was a movement across the country to prevent evictions, because at that time we didn't know what the virus was doing, and we were told to stay home by our public officials. And of course, there were disruptions for income for tenants across the service industry, really across several industries. So governments across the country, including our own provincially, moved to prevent evictions in Saskatchewan here for about 4 months. And that was a real challenge, because it essentially said, if you can't pay your rent, we can't evict you, which is a good notion on a public health side, but it drastically prevents a landlord's ability to maintain their property. We know that groceries need to be paid for at the co-op when you go, because that's the right thing to do. And we would argue that your housing is provided to you and you need to pay for it. So that eviction moratorium in Saskatchewan really hurt our small and medium-sized landlords who weren't getting rent and who were missing mortgage and property tax payments for a period of up to 4 months. Once that eviction moratorium passed, we saw some issues in 2021 with large rates of homelessness in Saskatchewan due to the provincial government changing an income assistance program over the course of Q3 and Q4 of 2021, which impacted those members of ours who provide below market rental rates for people on income assistance. We continue to work on that challenge, but those would be kind of the big two that we faced. In addition to lower immigration numbers over the last year and a half, which contributed to a vacancy number that was higher than usual.
Interesting. So kind of shifting out of the pandemic, Cameron, what are we seeing that are these challenges going to slowly work themselves out? Of course, immigration is something that we would kind of hope that once things get more back to normal, that this will kind of go par for the course or maybe even increase. What can we say about that?
Well, the federal immigration minister has put forward quite an ambitious plan of over 420,000 immigrants into Canada over 2022. And Saskatchewan would look to meet or exceed our average immigrant numbers of about 11 to 14,000, depending on the 5-year average that you look at, which bodes well for our rental property industry here in the province. It stirs demand for various levels of rental stock, from older stock to newer stock for those immigrants who have higher wealth or income. But we are seeing supply constraints in the short term as we wait for some new units to come on board. Specifically in Saskatoon, there are a number of developments that are coming on board over the next 12 to 18 months. But we've also seen a return to in-class learning across our university towns, which impacts the older stock closer to universities a lot more, where we've seen students come back this winter for classes at the U of R and the U of S, as well as polytechnic and campuses in smaller communities across the province. So we foresee that demand remaining strong over the course of this winter, and even to some degree into spring classes for our university students. But the housing market works, the home ownership market works not in tandem with rental properties, but there's certainly a lot of influence there, because we've seen over the course of the last 2 years, due to low interest rates, some renters had an increased ability to buy real estate and enter the home ownership market because borrowing money was cheaper. That was offset, however, by increased real estate prices for homes, which again, in turn, reduces a renter's ability to enter the home ownership market. But we also saw some investors cash out of their properties, newer properties, and enter the rental market to see if they could ride the real estate wave and cash in over a longer time horizon. So there's lots of nuances that we've seen because of the pandemic, but it remains a beautiful time to invest in real estate and in rental property across the province so far.
For a lot of folks, when you hear from a beginner investor, we're always waiting for the market to crash to get involved in real estate investing. And this kind of ties into my next question, Cameron, as we talk about a supply constraint. There is not enough supply of single family homes. And I guess you could probably elaborate a little more on the rental side, that there's not enough supply to meet the demand. And this is ultimately, in my opinion, going to keep prices high and going to make it so that there's going to be a need for a continuation of homes for people who are looking to buy, as well as rentals to meet the demand from these folks who are coming in, or university students who are coming back. What can we say about the supply constraints and your take on probably a continuation of low inventory?
Well, it's certainly going to put upward pressure on real estate prices for home ownership, but also put some upward pressure on rents for rental properties. What we're observing on the supply constraints is, yes, the biggest demand is in single family properties because people over the course of the past 2 years have learned that they'd like a bit more space at home. And that consumer habit or preference has changed the demand for rental properties. And we hear from some of our property management members that they've got a waiting list for 3+ bedroom properties across the province. They can't fill them fast enough. And so we're seeing that demand outstrip typical kind of the classic 2-bedroom, 2-bathroom demand. However, we've also observed that the housing continuum in general, as you say, just has a lack of supply. And our friends at the Realtors Association do a great job of articulating why supply is so crucial. And we've talked to members in Saskatoon specifically. On the apartment purpose-built rental side, we're likely to see that supply increase with some new developments coming on board in downtown and in Evergreen specifically by a number of our members who are developing. However, what we aren't seeing, of course, is single-family homes or 3-bedroom apartments that are filling up the housing continuum because, of course, they aren't as popular for rentals. Typically, we'll see people own 3-bedroom homes and rather than rent them. But with immigration, it takes some time to onboard these people into the Saskatchewan real estate market. So the rental of single-family homes is really popular amongst the immigrant population in Saskatchewan. So without significant supply increases, we'll continue to see vacancy come down over the long term, which will put an upward pressure on rents, which of course is good for investors. Some would argue politically not that great because we're squeezing the middle class more and more. But we'll have to wait and see in terms of how the real estate market moves. I've been waiting for it to crash for 2 years too, Ron, and I'm kind of wishing I had bought in 2020 rather than waiting, but here we are.
It turns into one of those things, Cameron, where you look in your crystal ball and I'll take a look at mine, and in 10 years we'll both have a glance and see who is right, because ultimately no one knows how to perfectly time the market. There are indications that tell us what in general will happen, but to say what exactly is going to happen over the next 5 years is an impossibility. It really depends, like you say, a little factor here, a string pulled there, and then we'll see that kind of affect down the road. It seems as if we're kind of in for a period of increased housing prices, and until there's more supply than there is demand. And like you say, the direction is pointing that we're going to see more demand for houses than we are going to see a lack of demand for that. So heading into this new year here, we're sitting just at the end of February at the time of recording now. What are some trends that, if we could say, that we're looking for the 2022 market when it comes to rental properties?
Well, CMHC just released their rental market report for 2022, and it's more a look behind, but it does help inform kind of the strategy. Pardon me, moving forward. In Saskatoon, vacancy was about 4.8%, and followers of our association know that we take these numbers with a bit of a grain of salt, because they are a picture in time in the latter part of 2021. And an average 2-bedroom rent was about $1,183. In Regina, vacancy was quite a bit higher at 7.1%, and average 2-bedroom rent was $1,156. Observing the trend of rental rates, pardon me, over the course of the last few years since I've been with the association, rental rates have been virtually static and or well below inflation. So we're actually likely going to see, with increased demand this year, quite a jump in rental rates, in my opinion, because frankly, real estate investors just can't afford not to. With rising inflationary costs and pressures on the property tax and on the variable rate mortgage side, if we see the Bank of Canada hike rates, we will be forced to raise rents just in order to break even on the cash flow side. So I think this is a year where we're going to see a bit more of an increase in rental rates as compared to years gone by. But again, remains drastically more affordable in some of our competitor markets. Even in Warman and Martensville, we see 2-bedroom rents that are $100 lower than even in Saskatoon in new stock. So in terms of when to enter the real estate market and if 2022 is the year, I was taught that the best time to plant a tree was 10 years ago, and the best time to buy real estate was 10 years ago, because we consistently see the market appreciating. So I don't think there's ever a bad time to buy real estate or invest in rental properties. And frankly, if you want to think with your heart as well as your head, it's also a great service that you can provide for your community. If you have a basement suite, it helps not only your mortgage, but it gives somebody a home that lives in your community and supports kind of high quality housing. So with inventory levels down, we hope that single family property owners can become landlords relatively easily through a legal basement suite or maybe through a renovation. And that's how people as well can offset those mortgage payments that have increased due to rising real estate prices. So there are some benefits to being a landlord. It's not for the faint of heart, I'll say that, but I'll put a plug in for our association. We'll help you every step of the way if you want to rent out a legal basement suite. So we're happy to help.
What I would say to a lot of people who I talk to about real estate investing is it's not so much, maybe if I could be tongue in cheek, not investing, but you own a little business, right? You have an expense sheet, an income sheet, and you have to balance the books, and you have to make sure that at the end of the day, you are cash flowing, or at least have the, trajectory to do so, because you are running your little business and you have to be able to make it work, where it's not as easy as just buying and selling a stock. Would you kind of agree with that, Cameron?
Absolutely. There will be people that criticize the financialization of rental housing, but fundamentally, landlords and property managers provide a great need. We house over 30% of Saskatchewan's population, and in order to do it well, we need to make enough money to cash flow, of course, to pay the property taxes, to generate economic outputs through suppliers, through the vendors that we use, And we need to make enough money to make sure that we can continue to invest in that real estate property, to provide the safe, high quality housing that our province expects. If we don't cash flow well, we turn into properties that are derelict and unsafe, and we all know the famous names in Saskatoon that we'd like to avoid. So cash flow is really important, and managing a rental property like a business is great advice. It doesn't mean you have to gouge your tenants. It just means you need to make enough money to reinvest in the property and do a good job.
And even from that standpoint, if we look at a student who's coming from, we'll take my hometown of St. Brew, and they're coming in for university in Saskatoon. If there's no rental property available for them to live, what are they going to do? There is always a demand and a need for rental property investing.
Absolutely. I mean, we're seeing economic investments from the private sector at the BHP mine in Jansen that's likely to have a big impact on the neighboring city of Humboldt for transient workers who may not be staying at the camp. With the revamp of the paper mills in Prince Albert, there needs to be adequate rental housing available for those people who are going to be there for 3 or 4 or 5 years, or just during the construction phase, that aren't going to buy a house in Prince Albert, but you know what, they want a nice place to live and go home to at the end of every day. So I mean, 30 to 35% of Saskatchewan's population rents, and we don't see that number decreasing anytime soon.
Well said. Well said. Cameron, I like to ask this question of everyone who comes on just before we get to some of your contact information. If you could go back and give a younger version of yourself some advice, what would that advice be?
That's a great question. Probably, get a bit more exercise. It seems like a lame, piece of advice, but the benefits of exercise I found later in life are just pretty awesome to deny. So kind of getting out there, finding a good sport or hobby earlier on is great for not only the social life, but keeps the ticker pretty healthy. So I'm a pretty pragmatic, practical guy, so I'm going to go with that piece of advice.
Wonderful. I really like it. Cameron, if anyone is interested in learning more about the Saskatchewan Landlords Association or how to become a member, how can they get in contact with you? Are there any different social pipes that they can find you on?
Certainly. We're on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. We're pretty active across all of those platforms. If you want more information on our association and what we do, it's Saskatchewan Landlord Association.ca. But you can also just pick up the phone and call us. We don't have an answering machine. You'll hear a real person on the end of the phone. So we'd love to chat real estate, pros, cons, and what rental property looks like in the province. We're always happy to help people who are interested in becoming landlords or property managers.
Thanks very much for your time today, Cameron. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure, Ron. Great.
Thanks again so much for checking out this episode. If you enjoyed it, please consider hitting the like and subscribe button. If you're looking for a little more information on Saskatchewan real estate, please check out our social channels. We're on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and of course, TikTok. I'm Ron Caroni, your Saskatchewan mortgage professional. Have a great week.